All right. Okay, so when you start ZBrush Mini 4, this is what it looks like. I'll be using a tablet, but you could use a mouse. Quickly cover the interface. So here at the top, you've got a way to open projects that you've worked on. So I have a few. Let's see. I don't know where I put them. Clicking, here they are. So after you've sculpted something, you can open them. And this is basically what we're going to be doing today, is a quick sculpt of a head. That button starts a new project. This is the save button. Now you've got a sphere or a cube. I'm going to start from the sphere, so I'm just going to put that on there and leave it. This is your symmetry. We can turn symmetry on and off with the X button. We have our draw size, which we can use our open and close brackets. Those are the keys below the minus and the plus sign on the top of the keyboard. I tend to use those the most. Our strength of our brush, now I'm probably going to keep it somewhere right around in here. If we end up with too many polygons, we can actually do a reduction. We can save out an image. We can export out a 3D object of our sculpt so that we can print it. And you can go to ZBrush Central and look at everybody's work or upgrade. Off to the left, we have a handful of brushes to use for sculpting. You can change the color of it, and you can change the material capture, which is basically what this object looks like. I'm just going to leave it on the standard matte cap, but that's that. Here we have our perspective. We can turn our perspective on and off with P as well. And right now we're rotating on the X. I think it's just on the Y. It may not work like it does in ZBrush, the full featured one. This should be, you can rotate in any direction. This one keeps it on an axis. So we'll probably just leave it on that. This is your local transformations. We probably won't use that. This button allows you to see a grid on the floor. And if you look real close, you can see that there's also an X and a Z option there, so you can see where the X plane is and the Y plane. We'll just leave that set to, actually we'll just turn that off. So here we can move around. Here, if you just click and hold, you can zoom in and out. And this one allows you to rotate as well. This button, if you zoomed in or you've managed to move your object out of view, you can just hit the frame button and it'll frame it within the viewport. And for keyboard commands, if you press the Alt key and left mouse click and drag, you can move it around. While holding down that left mouse button, if you let go of the Alt key, you can now zoom in and out. If you just click an empty space, you can rotate. If you press Shift while rotating, it'll snap it to a view. And if you look here in the top right, you can see this little mannequin head. That's how we can tell which direction we're rotated in. This button here shows us our polygons and triangles. They're all polygons, but it gives us an idea of our density in our sculpt. And during our sculpt, we'll use something called dynamic topology. And when we draw, the topology actually changes based on what we're doing. All right, so I'm going to turn this off because I don't need to see that. I think that's pretty much the interface. So a couple of the techniques that I'll be using when I'm sculpting, I'll be building out. When I'm carving in, I'm pressing the Alt key, and that'll carve into the mesh in order to dig a rut or hollow out some eye sockets, build some ears, stuff like that. Are there any questions about the interface so far? It's pretty straightforward. It's super light, and it's really just the basic sculpting tools of ZBrush. And the whole purpose behind it is they wanted you to have the opportunity to find out if this is something you like before you spend the money on the actual application. The tools I'm going to be using, I'm mostly going to be using the clay buildup brush, but I'll be using the move tool, the slash brush, the snake hook brush, and the hard polish brush the most. I might get into the inflate brush. If I use the snake hook brush, I tend to use the inflate brush, and I'll go over why when we're working on it. The standard brush is super useful. I don't use it much because I fell in love with this being a traditional sculptor. It just feels like laying down a strip of clay. Now, before I get into sculpting, I have a bunch of reference that I like to use when I'm doing anything. And this is all reference that I've drawn for myself. It's a collection of stuff that I've found on the internet. I honestly don't remember these names. Well, I remember some of them now because I've been doing it for a while. But like this little thing right here, when you look at it on an actual human, it's like this little nodule here. That's the term I use to remind myself, the nodules around the corners of the lips. I don't remember the Latin names. I maybe should at this point, but point is I always work with some kind of reference to know where I'm going and where I want to end up. And if I'm missing anatomy, I may not realize which piece of anatomy I'm missing, but when you're looking at my finished artwork, you'll be like, something don't look right. So I reference this stuff repeatedly. I'm going to move this off of the screen. I always have it up on a second monitor when I'm sculpting. I like to remind myself if I don't have reference, I'm doing it wrong. My memory is okay, but the older I get, the less I remember. Now, the reference that I have all starts from something like one of these little models. If you've taken any art classes or figure drawing, it's the planes of the face. It's how we kind of remember head shape and angles and how things go together at their basic or most raw form. I'm not going to do a plane of the face, but if you look right here in the top right corner, we have one. So I also use this little guy as a point of reference as well to kind of keep me in check if I'm just trying to get my overall shapes. A lot of times artists will squint their eyes, kind of blur out the details. It's called squint factor. It's a technical technique, and even though it's kind of silly to watch somebody do, you just kind of stand back or you squint your eyes and you blur out the details, see if everything's in the right place. So let's make a head. So I'm going to make my brush size pretty big, and I'm just going to pull this out into the egg shape that we always kind of want to achieve first to start working with our geometry, or if we were just drawing, to give us the shapes that we want.
22 will say the number.
We also want to keep rotating around just to see this thing from every angle. He's a little square, but we'll fix that as we go. Ultimately, I'm going to want to end up with a neck, so I'm just going to come right under here, and using the snake hook brush, this guy right here, we'll just pull this out. I'm going to pull out some shoulders. And before we get into the really fun stuff, I'm going to use this inflate brush to kind of inflate this. And the reason why I want to inflate this is because when I start using some of the other brushes, like the clay brush, if I'm too close, it'll just start pulling. Let me make this a little smaller. If I pull out like this, it's going to grab this and move it in the direction that it's trying to push it. So if I inflate it big enough, the brushes won't affect the other side. So here, you can see how it's just kind of crushing that in. That's something I don't want. So I should do a ton of stuff with this move brush. So I'm going to grab and pull my jawline out. I may want to move my chin forward. I may want to make some major changes to the forehead, move it forward some. And I'm just going to jump right into sculpting because I do enjoy sculpting quite a bit. So I'm going to remove some of the meat right here. I'm going to try and get this neck looking more like a neck. So I'm just going to lay down some of that geometry, and you can see it's starting to get kind of dense in these areas. So when I'm sculpting with the clay brush or any of the other brushes that are additive or subtractive, once I start to smooth, I'm no longer stretching those little polygons because the triangles are a lot smaller. This is based on my brush size. So if my brush is big, it's going to reduce that geometry. If my brush is small, it's not going to reduce it like it did when my brush was big. Now, as you reduce it while you're smoothing, you obviously can't go back and smooth this to get smaller geometry. So that only works with your clay buildup brush. Once you start smoothing, well, it works with your clay buildup brush, your pinch brush, your inflate brush, your snake hook brush, the polished brush, the standard brush. So your slash brush and your move brush aren't, actually I might be wrong about that. Yeah, it's just your move brush that doesn't adjust that. So your smooth brush will reduce the geometry, so be aware of that. So back to clay buildup brush. I'm going to start putting stuff in place of where I want it. So I'd say right about here, I'm going to press Control. I'm sorry, Alt. I can't talk today. Just kind of map out the area where I'm going to start putting the brow and the eyes. I'm going to carve out some sockets here. I'm going to kind of want that kind of flat when I start to draw my eyes. I'm going to give myself a nose. I want a little bit more below the nose, so I'm going to move the chin down some. Then I'm going to sculpt in the barrel of the mouth. So I've got my chin. Make this a little bigger. And I'm going to smooth a lot. I mostly don't care if I destroy something at this point. Maybe I'll start bulking up these cheekbones. And right here, I'm going to give myself this bit of meat so that I have some ear. We'll work on that a little later. I'm going to carve in some of this area right here. And I'm making real big movements, real big changes. I'm not worried about detail. I just want to make sure that everything looks correct. I want the throat in here, so I'm gonna and smooth the heck out of it. And like I said, I'm just making broad strokes. I don't really care if I mess stuff up, if it's not right. I can always move it around. But I want to be real loose, get the main big chunks of geometry in there. So we've got our collarbone. Maybe I want to move this around because I need more of a back and shoulders. So let's just move that out. Go back to that clay buildup brush and just start having fun with it again. I'm going to fill that area in a little bit. Get this all roughed in so that I have the main shape of the back of the neck. I want some more bulk here. Maybe we want these traps to come out. Like I said, I'm not overly worried about if it's perfect. I just want it to be there so when I do start actually working on it to finalize it, everything's in the right place. So once I have everything where I want it, I want some more geometry, so I'm just going to kind of brush over these areas and smooth them. All right. I'm going to pull this down and forward because it's not quite right. I should have that probably more about like that. Put this little Adam's apple right there. We'll do that little pit right there below it. So we made some broad changes real quick just with the clay brush and the move brush, but we can start moving this overall shape around depending on what our reference looks like. We can push in the temples here, we push the jaw in, move the mouth around, adjust the nose. And at this point I tend to do a lot of moving. something like these ears, we can start kind of trying to get their shape as well. And the real takeaway from this is, doesn't matter how good you are at moving geometry around if you're not paying attention to your reference. But anatomy is the key to sculpting if you're sculpting characters. If you know the anatomy, your characters are just going to look better because you're putting anatomy in the right spots. I am pressing the smooth, to smooth, I'm pressing shift. Hold on, yep, chance you're correct. I press Alt with the clay buildup brush. Actually, the standard, the clay buildup, inflate, pinch, snake hook, slash, and polish. If you're pressing Alt, it does the opposite of what it's set to. So by default, these are all additive. So like with the clay buildup, that's gonna push those out along their normals. And what I mean by that is each polygon face has a little line, a little invisible line that shoots directly out of the face of the polygon. And it's either gonna move it outward towards you or away from the mesh, or inward if you're pressing the Alt key. That makes sense to everybody? Yeah, this program's really just designed to do quick basic sculpts. In ZBrush, we can do all kinds of, like in the full version of ZBrush, we could do all kinds of really cool low poly stuff, high poly stuff. We can actually do a bunch of different types of modeling in the full versions of ZBrush. This one is really catered to the sculpting portion of that. So we have quite a limited tool set here. I'm going to go ahead and keep pushing this guy a little further. So let's maybe... So, yeah, Blender is pretty fully featured sculpting package as well. That's actually the 3D software we use at our studio for M3D and Infinideck. It's pretty robust and it does almost anything you can imagine. Gonna switch to the slash brush. Make this a little bit smaller, and I'm gonna carve in some lines for my nostrils. I'm gonna probably go something like this for my little laugh line, and then I'm gonna carve in a line across the barrel of the mouth to help create my lips. Now they're a little funky, a little pursed, but we'll work on that. So back to the clay buildup brush. I'm going to smooth all of these lines. Like I said, I don't really care too much if I'm kind of destroying my stuff along the way. Here's that little nodule I was talking about. I'll probably bulk this up a little bit. Smooth it out. Let's carve down a little bit. I want to give this bottom lip some volume. And then right here I have some muscles that I'm going to kind of pull around. Let's see. Then I'm going to smooth that whole thing out because I'm going to go back in and detail it here in a little bit. I'm going to pull these nostrils out. I jump around a lot. If I focus on one area too much, I find that I maybe end up with a really perfect mouth, and then I have to go work on the nose, and everything that I just did on the mouth gets blown away because I wasn't ready. So
I'll just pop in.
put
You'll
this
see.
stuff here.
I'll resend everything to you.
Start carving out where I don't want it, carving in where I do.
Let's send over now. Thank you.
Let's carve out a little bit. I'm gonna give myself some brow. I'm gonna make my brush a little bigger. Got this protrusion here from the top of the brow. I'm gonna carve in a little more because I want that to be a little deeper. I'm gonna, before I forget, I'm gonna put that little cone of the ear back there. And we're starting to get something that looks like a face, kinda. It's flat, it's very flat up front. So let's go back to the move tool. And I'm just gonna pull. I might end up kind of making the palate of my mouth a little funky doing this, so we'll just kind of pull that back out, pull these corners back. We want it rounded. Maybe you don't want them to smile. Let's pull it in a little bit because we want that to be in line with the center of the eye, or really close to the center of the eye. And I think we're looking all right. Let's narrow that chin down some. I tend to work a lot more on all the features before I ever add the eyes. I don't want to run out of time and not do the eyes, so I'm just going to kind of rough the shape in. I'm going to work for my eyes for now. I'm going to want some nostrils in here, so let's go ahead and just get something in there. Now I'm going to move this stuff around using the move brush because I want a much narrower area right there where the philtrum is. Sculpt that out a little bit, smooth that. So let's get back to that mouth because that's really what I wanted to work on. So I'm going to pull some of this meat right around from the upper lip. Smooth that, and then I'm going to switch back to this slash brush. I'm going to just kind of carve in. And then I'm going to press the Alt key, and I'm going to, I don't like that, that's too strong, so I'm going to reduce the intensity. Maybe I don't want too much of that there. So that looks a little better. It's still got a weird funky shape here, so I'm going to fill that in. I'm just going to smooth it. And I'm going to get back into these muscles here because I kind of crushed them when I moved it. So that's an okay mouth. Maybe his nose is too low. But I'm missing a lot of the anatomy that happens off of the nose. So back to that clay buildup brush. And I want to pull, looking at my reference, I want to pull right from around the nostril right here. I'm going to come right into here. And I'll just smooth that out. Maybe I'm too far away from where I need to be because I didn't rotate properly, so maybe I'll just get rid of that. Go back to that slash brush, maybe make it even smaller because I want tiny crease. What is my intensity? So my intensity is kind of down because I don't want to dig it out too much. Now it usually starts off pretty strong up here, so maybe I could come in here and do a little bit more. Just kind of smooth that out. So this area looks pretty decent. I can play around with it. I can move and make really broad changes with this move brush. We can have some fun with it at this point. Let's work on these eyes a little. So I'll show you kind of how I tackle eyes in ZBrush Mini Core. In most applications, I would just use spheres and then build up my eyes around the spheres. Here in ZBrush Mini Core, you're limited to one piece of geometry. So we solve problems. I mean, that's basically what an artist does every day with everything they ever do, is solve problems. So I think I'm going to try and get that almond shape that we have with our eyes. So let's carve out a little bit right here. So there's that little area right next to the corner of the eye. And we'll smooth that out. And then I'll do that bottom lid right through here. And then I'm going to kind of make my brush a little bigger and just kind of get the bags of the eyes right there. And then let's get some of that lid. Now in the brow we have this little bit of meat that hangs down. The older you get, the bigger that gets. And we're going to have this little crease here. Let's go ahead and smooth. We might actually have too much here, so probably end up with some more of that eyelid kind of shooting over into that area. Now we'll just smooth that out so it's kind of not in the way. And then I'll make my brush a little smaller and I'll try to refine these. Then I'll just kind of carve out some spots for the eyes. His ears stick out a little too much, so let's move those back some. Digging into the model, is that just a forming the mesh towards the inside, or is it removing the mesh? Sorry. No, it makes perfect sense. It moves it inwards. Depending on the brush you're using, like when I'm using a clay brush, it does reduce the geometry. The Inflate Brush just inflates and deflates the geometry. It doesn't actually reduce or tessellate the geometry dynamically like the clay buildup brush does. Let's see. Yeah, no primitives chance. The eyes are kind of the hard part when you don't have the spheres to work around. One of the things that happens to me here is these eyes are flat. So in order to really make them look right, they look terrible from right here. So I'm going to have to go in and I'm going to have to move stuff around or set my sculpt up a little different in the beginning, which I'm going to use the move tool and the alt brush to push these things back along their normals. So there's a lot of tweaking to do eyes like this, and it's kind of a pain. But for traditional sculpting stuff, this is not terrible. Like if you're just gonna print this out and that's about it, then you don't have the luxury of setting this up for animation. Again, this is just a kind of a diet version of what you would be getting involved in if you were to actually pick up the full version of ZBrush. Does that make sense? I tend to do this when I'm doing lectures. I'm a huge Bern Hogarth fan, and he made me understand anatomy in a way that I like to kind of use his methods, and he over exaggerated his muscle structure. His drawings are fantastic. He's one of the fellows that did a lot of the Tarzan drawings. Let's see. So I could take this into ZBrush. Like if I exported this out into Blender or ZBrush, I could retopologize it and set it up for animation. All right, so let's do, all right, so the eyes are very, in my opinion, really terrible. But I'll deal with that later if we have enough time. I'm going to kind of work on the ears a little because that's something that always kind of eluded me. I'm going to pull these guys back. So it was one of the hardest things for me with the face. The toes and fingers were hard with the rest of the character, but over time you just find your own techniques that make things work real good for you. I think I'm gonna be happy with that, and I'm gonna make some major changes to the overall shape of his head. I'm kind of rushing through this, so he's kind of anatomically correct, but if you really started to analyze him, he's got a lot of issues. And I'm going to try not to get hung up on stuff. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to carve out the conch area. Just get a hole there. Kind of smooth it around. And let's carve out some more right here. He does have a flat face. All right, so we'll pull the helix out right here. And I'm going to kind of get in here and bulk the ears up a little bit. This is an area where I tend to spend far more time than I'd like to admit, and I'm going to rush through this just to kind of get the point across. use that slash brush to bring that crease down through there. Then I'll go back in with the clay buildup brush and start adding in the stuff that I kind of blew apart. How are we looking on time, Nick?
Pretty good. Hey, Mike, I have a silly question. It's more of a personal question. You know, if you go to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, you see busts just like this, you know, in their Hall of Fame. Would this be a program that they would start off with to get the replication of the bust size and headshot for the player they're inducting?
A lot of times, something like that's, at least nowadays, they'll use a lot of photogrammetry. So for software, it would probably go from something like Blender or Maya to get the scale, and then they'll bring the base mesh in and the scan in, and they'll project them in ZBrush, and then they take them back for rendering or for printing. The full version of ZBrush has the capability of kicking out a print-ready model. If it's a full-color print, we would probably want to go from ZBrush back into Maya or Blender, make sure all of our textures are set up right, make sure we don't have any weird seams. Did that answer that question? All right, Kelly,
Yeah,
in this program, I'm sorry, Nick, go ahead.
No, you did. Thank you.
In this program, earrings are not a real viable thing because it gives you one piece of geometry to work with. So if you wanted something like hoop earrings, you would have to go into Blender or the full version of ZBrush. But if you wanted something like plugs or something that had a significant gauge size to it, you just have to do and then we could maybe use the polish brush to kind of make sense? Well, in ZBrush, there's fiber mesh. Here in this program, I would do the sculpted version of hair. So maybe this guy has, let's see. So we'll rough in. The way I normally tackle hair for games would be poly hair. So I build poly strips, and then I'll texture them, or I'll use fiber mesh to create my textures for my poly strips. They're efficient, and they render quickly, and you can animate them pretty easily. So I'm going to turn symmetry off, and let's give this guy. So I might want to get the volume of this guy's hair before I try to do the finished version. So let's bulk up the volume. Maybe as a cowlick. Now, I've noticed that when I'm recording and streaming and using ZBrush that I start to get, you're seeing like, I'm getting a little bit of lag or latency. When I'm just using ZBrush Mini Core, I don't tend to have this problem. I'll be honest, I mostly use the full version of ZBrush. And it handles geometry way better. So when I start to end up with some weirdness here, I may have to reduce that geometry. So it'll run a process that is decimating the poly count so that it's a little bit more fluid. So it's kind of reduced it as best that it possibly can. So now I get a little bit more response to what I'm doing. You can use polystrands in the full version. Oh yeah, I love ZBrush. I kind of, Mark, I use both. I've got a Cintiq, so I'm drawing on my monitor. I also have a bamboo tablet. To me, it's just as functional as my Cintiq. I find myself occasionally tinkering with it when I haven't used it in a while just to play with it because it's a little different. You know, my tablet, I'm looking at my monitor drawing on something that's not in front of me. My monitor or my Cintiq, I'm drawing right there what I'm seeing. And then with the mouse, I use, when I'm doing moves, like when I use the move brush, I am probably using the mouse more than I am using the tablet. He does kind of look like an evil villain, doesn't he? I turned off symmetry, so let's turn that back on. Maybe this will. There you go. Is that a little less menacing, Kelly? No, okay, so when you're using the full version of ZBrush, you can remesh. Like I use the sculptors thing in the full version of ZBrush a lot, but then I'll run ZRemesher, or when I'm ready to go into animation, I'll do retopology. I can retopo in Maya, Blender, ZBrush, doesn't really matter, whichever one's more comfortable for you. But the retopology portion is usually where I go when I'm done. I'm sorry, Kelly, I don't mean to be scary. Did that make sense? We teach Blender or Maya at the school. There's a lot of jobs that are very specifically looking for Maya users. My studio is a Blender studio. Chance is not wrong. The sculpting tools inside Blender are fantastic. If you don't have the money to get ZBrush, it'll give you the full sculpting experience. I'm a huge fan of ZBrush. I started using ZBrush around 99. I'm very, very comfortable with the tool set. Well, you don't need to worry about the triangles when you're sculpting. So, let's see. It's studio preference. So let's say somebody went to school for Maya and started a studio. They're probably going to open a Maya studio. Um, Blender has now just made it into the adult version of 3D software. In the past, there was no support, so studios just didn't use it. Within the last few years, they have a full support team. It's now a functional piece of software you can use in production. It's really just a preference. ZBrush is pretty much used across the board. Every studio probably has ZBrush in their pipeline. So, who am I talking to? Mark. All right. I'm so sorry. So if I run, like if I'm sculpting here, let me actually do something real quick. I now have this gobbledygook. But that's not really conducive to what I might want to do with my sculpting over here. So then I might run Dynamesh. So let's say I wanted a much higher resolution because I booleaned a bunch of pieces together and I wanted clean resolution. So now I want, and I tend to duplicate a lot. So now I want to run something to reduce the geometry but hold the volume. So I'll go into ZRemesher. And I can do, right now it's going to remesh it at around 5,000 polygons. Got 1.295 million. So when I run ZRemesher, now I also am streaming, recording. I've got ZBrush Mini Core open and now ZBrush. I'm really punching my computer right now. But it gives me something that I can work with. The other thing in ZBrush is, in the full version, I have these guides. So with these guides, I can say, let's add a laugh line. Let's say we go right here. Maybe I want my polygons to go there. Then I can run this ZRemesher with guides, and it'll try its best. It works better if I have a dense piece of geometry. So let's do it here real quick. So let's do our eye mask. Let's do a thread ripper is not necessarily a bad idea because they're awesome. ZBrush does run more on, so it tries to do those loops. It's still not production ready for animation, but it can really get you close. Stuff like this may not be good for sculpting. So in those cases, I may want, let's say, here, let me do this. Let's say I want this piece of geometry subtracted from his head. So this is how I could also do earrings in the full version of ZBrush. I'm going to set that to be subtractive. And I'm going to move this guy down one. So I'm going to take him and I'm going to run Dynamesh. And I'm just going to leave it mostly the same. And then I'm going to merge it down one more time. So I'll bring it down. Oh, this one right here. Let's do merge down. And then I'm going to hold control and drag out, and that's going to run the Dynamesh. But it's going to remove this particular piece of geometry, so he'll have a hole in his head. So even though it was faceted in there, it's still a pretty clean subtraction. With ZBrush, you're mostly using your CPU more than you're using your GPU. I have a RTX 11 gig card. It's the 2080, I believe. I didn't really see any kind of improvement in ZBrush. I saw it all in rendering using Redshift and cycles. So I'm going to close the full version of ZBrush down. Hopefully everybody had a good time. Hopefully you learned a lot, and if there's any questions you guys have that I haven't answered, I'd be glad to. Kind of feel like I inadvertently made this guy. Nick, correct me if I'm wrong. You guys have a technology package that gives you the basic specs for all of the software that we use. Am I correct?
We do. We have a package that we offer here through the school, but as far as minimum specifications, Chance, what I can do is I can have your admissions representative send you out the minimum specs that would be required to run the software packages that we use here. So I'll get that to you.
I am going to upload this video. I'm going to share a link here in a few with everybody that is this video plus the last couple of presentations that I've done for Nick. It's all basically the same stuff. I may have added stuff or left stuff out from one presentation to another. So I always feel like sharing everything is always nice.
Jalen, you can use your own tech if you have the right specifications. Yes, you can. It's always good to know what the minimum specs are. So I'll make sure your representative gets that to you so you can compare what you have here.
Chance, yours isn't a terrible system. You might want a little bit more powerful card if you want to get into the real-time ray tracing stuff that is now out. You might want an RTX card. How much memory are you running in your system? MacBook Pro, you can run ZBrush on it. You can run Maya on it. You've got a lot of limitations with your MacBook. Most of the software that we use is available on a Mac, but it's mostly developed. Yeah, that's a good system, Chance. You just need a video card. Most of the software you use, like for ZBrush example, it's developed for Windows and then it's ported to the Mac. So your development for Windows is first, and then the Mac, and then actually I believe it's Windows, Linux, and then Mac. So you're kind of at the bottom of the line when it comes to development. And also with some of the new technologies, you won't have access to any of the RTX stuff or the ray tracing stuff. If you go the game route, you're probably going to want to get a Windows system. Now, you should be able to do most of the stuff that the school would throw at you. Are you, Chance, are you going VFX or game? Yeah, so you just won't be able to do the real-time ray tracing stuff, which it's really just a button. So you could potentially do everything that I would throw at you, because I'm one of the game instructors, actually. No, but the Mac that you would need is twice as much as the Windows computer. So the Mac is prettier and more expensive. Windows is like almost a car you can tinker with. In production, most of the studios I've worked for were Windows. Actually, all of them were. And during a production, I've encountered this in more than one time, where hardware would break, and we would have to go to Walmart to buy hardware to make sure that we met deadline. I don't know of any store that sells Mac hardware, and I think that's why most studios are using Windows for production, at least the VFX and game side. Chance, are you wanting to share the screen? Do you mind if I let Chance share his screen here, Nick?
Yeah.
All right, Chance, there you go.
All I really wanted to do was just share an image. This is mainly just something I was working on just a couple of days ago that took an hour and a half to sculpt.
Yeah. Blender's sculpting tools are awesome.
It is really nice. And you really can't beat the whole low price of free.
You're not wrong there. Mike Keith does Maya placement, so I try not to go too much into Blender when I'm talking about stuff. I drank the Blender Kool-Aid years ago.
Though, to be honest, when I did try ZBrush for the first time when I went to the school, it was a lot easier to use right off the bat for me.
ZBrush is very artist friendly. I'm gonna take, if you right click on my name and give me presenter back, I'll show you something that I've more recently done.
Got about 3 more minutes left, Mike.
All right.
I click on you. I'm having trouble.
Just click on my name, left click on my name, and it should give you the option to make me presenter.
It says private chat.
Oh, I got it.
Okay, we're good.
All right.
I'm gonna mute myself now. Thank you, though.
Nice talking to you, Chance. Oh, I don't know what happened. Did I just cancel out of this? So, am I here?
We can hear you, but your screen share.
No, you got to give me presenter. For some reason, when I went to share my screen, it just kicked me right out of the whole thing.
Okay.
All right, I got it.
There you go.
Okay. So this is one of the character faces that I'm working on. It started as a sculpt. She might be a little creepy. I'll give that a second to render. This is for one of the avatars that we're working on for Infinitive. So that gives you an idea of what she looks like. I'm going to go ahead and stop the render. So that's the real-time version of her. And if we look at her polyflow, she's not very dense. Yeah, Blender's pretty cool sculpting tool. So just like ZBrush, you've got your move tool. All right, I'm not going to go into that, but yes, the tools are all relatively the same. It's free, so if you wanted to get into it, you could quickly get into sculpting. ZBrush's tools are more artist-friendly, especially if you're really new to sculpting, and it's a little less technical. Nick, I'm going to hand everything back over to you.
All right, Mike. Thank you very, very much, sir.
It was my pleasure. Everybody have a wonderful day. As soon as I get our videos processed, I will drop a link into the text, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
As always, Mike, we appreciate it. Folks, if you are a high school senior, and this is a special treat for high school seniors only,